Now that Seth has taught you how to learn, who's ready to learn? Okay, fine. So, you want to be a front-end developer? Are you aware that that's what this boot camp is about? Anybody in the wrong place? Okay, cool. So what does that even mean, front-end? Front-end versus back-end, right? Something like that? Thanks, Google Images. No. See what else Google Images can tell us about front-end development. Well, it would appear that front-end developers make flat, pastel-colored things for desktops, laptops, and mobile devices, and have coffee mugs usually. And sometimes there are cool logos and icons floating around their devices. So let's have a closer look at those icons. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. What do these things have in common? What do they have in common with each other that they don't have in common with these? Yes, sir. They're all browser-based. More logos, right? Browsers. Browsers know just what to do with these, and they don't know what the cuss to do with Ruby, Python, PHP, .NET, and Java. So, one possible definition of the front end is that it consists of anything that web browsers can interpret without any extra help. If you want a more technical definition, the front end refers to things that run on the client, while back end refers to things that run on the server. We're developing things for the web, so the client is the web browser. And remind me your name? Yeah. Josh, that's right. Thank you, Josh. Now, what's all this talk about a web? Slow down there, Grandpa. We only know about the Snapchats and the Yik-Yaks. Rip. What's this web business? Sounds like something for the elderly, like people in their 30s. Gross. What if I told you that your beloved Snapchat uses that very same infrastructure we call the World Wide Web? Huh? Yeah, so let's talk a little about how this so-called World Wide Web works, and soon you'll know as much as a stock photo model. You'll be as comfortable with the web as this guy, who thought his Palm Pilot bulky cell phone and 45-pound CRT displays would look cool much longer than they did. But he also thought his hair would last a lot longer. But anyway, the web. When you visit a website, you type a URL or search term into your browser. That sends a request from your computer to that big cloud we call the internet. Specifically, a little corner of the internet called the web, where it eventually reaches a server. The server then does who knows what. It might just grab a file from storage. Oh, you want dogfood.html? That's sitting right here. I'll just pick this up and send it right back to you in my response. Or, inside the question mark, it could be running an entire application written in Python or Ruby or something, the output of which just happens to be something a browser understands. And it sends that in the response. Doesn't matter what happens in the question mark. Point is, somehow it does something with our request, and eventually it sends back a response. And the response could be anything. It could be a zip file. It could be an error message, whatever. It could be some JSON, but most of the time, it's one of the handful of things that your browser can read without any additional software. Primarily, HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. Again, the server might be running some application whose output just happens to be those things. And a backend developer will write that code and make sure that the output is the stuff that you built. The HTML, the CSS, or the JavaScript. Or maybe a cat photo. But that's pretty much all your web browser understands. Now, it could also be video or audio, but if your web page autoplays that crap, you may as well be summoning the actual devil like our friend Spock here. Your guess is as good as mine. But it's probably HTML, CSS, or JavaScript, or Lil Bub. And only one of those things is a programming language. No, Lil Bub isn't a programming language. It's JavaScript, your new best friend. Yay. So front-end development is building all the stuff that gets sent in the response. all the stuff that the web browser will interpret and display, including, yes, dear old JavaScript. So, you want to learn more about JavaScript?
Yeah.
Why? I have it on good authority that JavaScript totally sucks. I did a Google search. Over 2 million results for JavaScript sucks. And look down here. Casey What's-His-Face there is a master programmer, and he doesn't mince words. Why do so many people seem to hate it? Well, because it sucks, obviously. Silly question, right? Sucks so much there are 2 million pages devoted to its suckitude. So why use it? Reason number 1, you don't have a choice. Because it's the only real programming language that these bozos understand. If you want to do front-end programming on the web, JavaScript is still the only game in town. You could write Elm or TypeScript or Dart or CoffeeScript or something, but only because those get turned into JavaScript before they're actually sent to the browser. Reason number 2, it's actually pretty good now. Little secret, these 2 million results, they're from last year. We're down to 1.5 million now. Furthermore, all the top 6 results from last year were actually making the case that JavaScript sucks. Let's look at the results for this year. Number 1 is from whydoesitsuck.com, a site where everything sucks. And, you know, if the number 1 result is whydoesitsuck.com, then maybe your thing actually doesn't suck that much, because that could be number 1 result for anything, including something that's good. And even that, look at the title. Why does JavaScript suck? A terrible language with a bright future, which is actually pretty fair. Number 2 is Your Language Sucks, a wiki page that lists what sucks about every programming language you can think of. So again, the top 2 results are from sites that could easily be the top 2 results for any language. Whereas a year ago, I assure you, they were from people who truly had a very personal grudge against JavaScript. So not so bad. And the third one, that says learning JavaScript in 2017 sucks. And this is awesome. They're happy about it. And it's just learning it that sucks, not the language itself. People complain that it's hard to learn JavaScript now because it's improving so rapidly and there are a ton of frameworks that are constantly changing. But that's a nice problem to have. It just puts you kind of on par with other languages. The next one, the author of this next post is actually a huge proponent of learning JavaScript, and that's the case he's making in the blog post. He's not saying it sucks. The word sucks appears twice in this post. One saying that it's possible that your local job market sucks, and another saying that a lot of JavaScript training sucks. But he didn't go to extern boot camp, so, you know. The next post says that if you hate JavaScript, it's due to ignorance. Number 6 is from Reddit, so let's not take that too seriously. And anyway, nearly all the comments on that link are saying that the article is a load of this particular emoji anyway. And the comment that's excerpted there in the results says, OMG, I don't understand JavaScript, therefore it sucks. And it's true. A lot of developers really hate JavaScript, but in many cases it's because they don't really take the time to actually learn it. They just want it to be their favorite language. I hate JavaScript because JavaScript isn't Python. Well, of course it isn't, but it is JavaScript, and maybe learn it, and maybe you'll like it a little better. Granted, there were genuinely some really unfortunate decisions made early in JavaScript's life that we still have to live with, and it does say something that one of the most popular books on JavaScript is called JavaScript: The Good Parts, and it's not a very long book. But a lot of people just don't like JavaScript because it isn't language X. For example, JavaScript is generally a semicolons and curly braces language. And we've seen those before. That's C on the left, Java on the right. JavaScript kind of looks like those. Unfortunately, it doesn't work anything like those. And if you've been doing it as long as I have, then you remember a time when it was truly miserable to work with. About a year or so ago, I think, Twitter released a little tool where you could look up your very first tweet. And one of the other guys at Fretless, Miles, looked up his. It was from 2008 saying, loving my job at hating JavaScript. That was his very first tweet. He signed up for a Twitter account just so he could say how much he hates JavaScript. And he hasn't posted since. No, just kidding. I think even he would admit that he hated it in large part because JavaScript isn't Ruby. Anybody know Ruby? Yeah, JavaScript is super, super not Ruby. And in 2008, hating JavaScript was a much more reasonable position to take, frankly. So now that we've talked about what garbage it is, who wants to learn JavaScript? Yay, I like your attitude. Okay, so sure, there were over 2 million pages saying it sucks a year ago, but I found over 9 million results for Star Wars Sucks. So maybe don't believe everything you read on the internet. So how did we get here anyway? Come with me on a magical journey to the far-off land of 1989. The Berlin Wall came down, Nintendo released the Game Boy, Batman and Indiana Jones ruled the box office, and that was the last time anybody ever made an Indiana Jones movie. Yes, it was. Shut up. Stop laughing. I still had hair. And at the CERN Particle Physics Laboratory, future home of the Large Hadron Collider, this guy, Tim Berners-Lee, created the World Wide Web, and with it, the HTTP protocol and HTML. He created it for sharing scientific documents in hypertext, the HT in HTML. So what the heck's hypertext? The picture's a clue. What makes it hypertext? Yeah. Hypertext links one document to another and many others. And that's still fundamentally what the web is. Only those linked documents can contain a lot more than just text. But in the beginning, there was only hypertext. Fast forward a couple years to 1991, when they made the last Terminator movie that anyone would ever make. Probably a good thing. They would have just gotten worse. But they never did it, so who knows? And I still had hair. Say, can anybody tell what game I'm playing in the upper right there? No, it's an NES. But what's that game in the upper right? See it? It is it is Mario. Anybody tell from that little tiny corner? Nope. It's a Mario game. Super Mario Brothers 3. All right, no bonus points for this group. That's right, got my little P meter there. Yeah. All right. So anyway, 1991. Thanks. Good old Tim made his creation available to the world with a humble newsgroup post. He launched it with a line mode browser that ran on pretty much any platform, as well as a browser with a graphical interface and a built-in WYSIWYG editor. Anybody know the term WYSIWYG? Yeah, what is it? What you see is what you get. In other words, as you edited it, you could get a preview of exactly what the document would look like in the browser. And that browser was called World Wide Web without the spaces. Later renamed Nexus because that's pretty confusing. And it was written in Objective-C and ran on NextStep, the operating system for Next workstations, the brainchild of this turtleneck-wearing cusser who had been fired from Apple. But Next computers were really friggin' expensive and not all that widely used, so it didn't really catch on just yet. So, in 1992, when I suddenly had long blonde hair, this guy told Tim he was thinking of writing a web browser for the X window system, which would allow it to run on a lot more Unix machines. Tim said, good idea. So, he made a new browser called Viola, that's right! Which you've never heard of. Yeah, but hey, it added a bunch of exciting new features such as tables, embedding web pages in other web pages, a scripting language to add interactivity to pages, a syntax for style sheets. All in all, a huge leap forward. But it still only ran on Unix, so nobody used it. Bummer, because it did a lot of things right. Fast forward to 1993, by which point I was the single most awkward organism on the planet. And the Legal Information Institute at Cornell had made the first website about law. And lawyers were like, it's a Unix system. I know this. No, just kidding. They were like, lol, what? And this guy was like, JK, I made a browser for Windows. And the lawyers were like, hype. And this new browser was called Cello. Cello. Get it, Viola? Cello? Huh? Yes. Cello was the first web browser for Windows 3.1. This changed everything. Hey, web browsers, step forward if anyone remembers you. Yeah, not so fast, Cello. Because you see, Around the same time, at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, birthplace of HAL 9000 in fiction, these two, who were students at the time, developed a web browser called... No, good guess. String base. No, not string base. Mosaic! Yay! Now, Mosaic was a legitimately big deal. Like Viola, it was a graphical browser for Unix. Unlike Viola, it was very quickly ported to other operating systems, including both Windows and Macintosh. And it was relatively easy to install and use, which made a big difference and was crucial because there were way more people interested in using the web than ever before. In some respects, the evolution of the web actually took some steps backward with Mosaic, whereas Viola applied formatting via style sheets, keeping presentation separate from content and structure. Mosaic just added a bunch of new HTML elements, like center and BR and B and stuff that didn't actually describe the content, it totally described the presentation. But people actually used Mosaic, so that kind of is what caught on. Just in time for 1994. When my friends and I still had hair, those other three jerks still do, and the information superhighway was all over in the news. That's all anyone would talk about, the information superhighway. Anderson Cooper told us all about it on Channel 1 News. Anybody watch Channel 1 News at their high school? One person, two people? Cool. Well, I watched it, by golly, and Anderson Cooper was on there with Lisa Ling and a bunch of other people. Yep. And so... Information superhighway, yeah, it was time to start figuring out how to make money with this thing. That's right. So back at the NCSA, at the University of Illinois, where Mosaic was developed, they started working on a commercial version of Mosaic. There's a for-profit company called Spyglass that exists for the sole purpose of taking technologies developed at the University of Illinois and commercializing them. So they got to work on Spyglass Mosaic. Meanwhile, the original author of Mosaic, this guy, started a new company and took most of the original Mosaic team with him. He called it Mosaic Communications until the NCSA called and was like, the Mosaic name's ours, buddy. So they gave their new version a code name, suggesting that their new browser was the Mosaic Killer. The Mosaic Killer. The Mosaic Killer. The Mosaic Killer. The Mosaic, that's right, Mozilla. Hey, Uncle Davey, I've actually heard of that. That's right, Mark and his friends adopted Mozilla as their mascot. But the browser itself ended up being called, that's right, Netscape. Netscape Navigator was released in October of 1994, implementing a ton of new features and very quickly rendering all other browsers irrelevant. So irrelevant that developers started inspecting the user agent string that gets sent with a request. What now? This is a user agent string. Remember the diagram with your laptop on the left and the cloud on the right? You send a request, and that includes not only the address you're requesting, it also includes some information about the client you're using, the browser, the user agent. And there's a string that identifies the version of the browser that you're using. And this was the one for Netscape. Netscape 1, identifying itself as Mozilla. So what happened was the people writing the stuff inside the question mark over here, they started actually looking for that string and wouldn't send it back, wouldn't send back the same response unless they saw that in there, which is a terrible, terrible way to try to detect the features that a browser uses, because what if the others do add it? Well, then you'll have to update your code, and that's a terrible way. You detect features, not browsers, folks. We'll come back to that. Spyglass, meanwhile, was licensing their version of Mosaic to who? Not Paul Rudd. Microsoft. That's right. All cuss. Player 3 has entered the game. That's right. Yes, Microsoft put a team of 6 to work enhancing Spyglass Mosaic and giving it that Microsoft flavor. Which brings us to 1995, when my hair reached its maximum strength, and it looks like I did a cover shoot for Young Republicans Quarterly or something that I've since forgotten. And Turtleneck Guy's other company made a movie about toys, and Alanis Morissette was ticked off about one thing or another, and Bill Gates and his start menu were masters of the universe. It says right there on time. So Bill and his pals at Microsoft were ready to show their fork of Mosaic to the world. You know it as Everybody now say it with me. That's right, a miserable pile of garbage called Internet Explorer, available in the Microsoft Plus companion for Windows 95. IE was pretty much just Mosaic dressed up like Windows 95 at that point. And the Netscape folks had been busy adding loads of new features. Internet Explorer didn't even support tables in the first release. They didn't even have that blue E icon yet. And they just labeled it the Internet. And seriously, forget what you know about IE 11 and Edge. They've come a long way, but the first two releases of IE had no redeeming qualities whatsoever. But everyone just used the browser that was on the floppy disk that their ISP provided anyway, which was virtually always Netscape. In fact, Microsoft's user agent string for Internet Explorer reported itself as Mozilla, with the truth in parentheses, so it wouldn't get ignored when folks were sniffing the user agent string. And guess what? To this day, every browser does that. All of them. They all report themselves as Mozilla with everything else in parentheses, so just in case you're looking for one of those strings, it'll be there. Mozilla. Oh, Apple WebKit, which is KHTML, which is like Gecko, which is what Firefox uses. Or Chrome, maybe. Safari. Edge. Heck, I don't know. This is the user agent string. I did not make this up. I copied it straight from the app. This is Edge. This is how Edge reports itself. It's everything. It's everything. They all do that. I know you were promised JavaScript. We're getting there. Just bear with me. So we're still in 1995, when Generation X was the absolute worst instead of you guys. So don't feel too bad. They say it about everybody. Look at this. 20-something. Laid back, late blooming, or just lost. Are music and movies killing America's soul? That's right. We didn't quite do the job, so you can finish it off. That is, assuming we still have a soul left. Not sure. But anyway, 1995. That was the year the web became widely available to mere mortals. And the commercial web was a very real thing. Amazon launched in 95. Yahoo launched in 95. RIP. CNET launched with a yellow sidebar that every other site on the web decided they needed to copy. Seriously, you can't imagine how influential that stupid yellow sidebar was. I say stupid like I didn't make like 20 sites with this thing. But still, it was very silly. And everyone was asking, how can we make more money with this? I know, the kids are into that. Let's make a movie. Yeah, they even made a movie about hackers in 95. The web was everywhere. Boot up or shut up. Oh, so edgy. Today's youth are going to eat this up. Ha ha ha. Online this fall. Get it? Oh, man, the studio execs were high-fiving over their piles of Coke, and they came up with this one. That's right. But as the web became widely available, we had to come up with a reason to be afraid of it. There have been a lot of Time magazine covers in this slideshow. It's good to know that 20 years later, we can still count on Time for some super relevant, hard-hitting news, like 15 awesome ideas for how to eat chia seeds. I don't know, with your mouse up your nose, stick them in your ears, who knows? 15 ways to eat chia seeds. But anyway, back to the days when they were throwing cyber in front of everything. Web developers, which was suddenly a real job, kind of, were asking how to add interactivity to their pages. Hypertext was neat and all, and there were some new tricks like tiled background images and animated GIFs, which were clearly a fad and have no place on today's web. But web monkeys wanted to add interactivity beyond hyperlinks. Enter plugins like Java applets, QuickTime VR, and Macromedia Shockwave. Incredibly, Shockwave is still maintained by Adobe for security, and even more incredibly, the Space Jam website is still online. So we had interactive content, even games, in the web browser, but interactivity via browser plugins was still a pretty dang poor experience. The plugins had to be installed, there were security risks, they were excruciatingly slow, and they couldn't actually interact with any of the HTML elements on the page. But luckily, a team of scientists at Netscape were hard at work on a scripting language that would run directly in the browser. Okay, so they weren't scientists. Okay, it was one dude and he spent a whole 10 days on it. But what was it? You guessed it. Mocha! Yeah, that's what the guy's boss said to call it. He really wanted to remind people of that other hot new platform that was named after coffee. But a few months later, in September of 95, they came up with a better name. And finally, we had LiveScript. Okay, that name didn't stick either. And in December, Netscape worked out a deal with Sun Microsystems, which had created the trendiest new platform in town, Java. Thanks to this trademark licensing agreement, which confuses people to this day, Netscape could call their new language JavaScript, despite having only the most superficial of similarities to Java. In any case, JavaScript now existed, was written in 10 days, and could be used far and wide, at least by people who were using the latest version of Netscape and who had JavaScript enabled in their preferences. But JavaScript had arrived, and because the name JavaScript wasn't confusing enough, when Microsoft reverse engineered it and added it to Internet Explorer, they called it JScript. With me so far? So over the next year or two, an organization called ECMA, that's the European Country Music Association. That can't be right. No. The European Chamber Music Academy. No. Sorry. The European Cylinder Makers Association. Yeah. It's this one. It's this one, though. Étude de conception de machine automatique. No? No. Okay, this is getting silly. It's obviously the Electronic Collar Manufacturers Association. I know. We have stuff to cover. For real, it's the East Coast Music Association. Canadian music, East Coast style. Huh? That's what I'm talking about. Okay. It was ECMA International, the European Computer Manufacturers Association, a standards body. And over the next couple of years, they worked on standardizing JavaScript. And they called it ECMAScript. So for the last 20 years, ECMAScript has been the official standard of which JavaScript is the primary implementation. So when we talk about the standard, it's ECMAScript, or ES, sometimes we'll call it. When we talk about the language or the implementation, it's JavaScript. So now that we've got our name straight, what the heck could JavaScript actually do? HTML could define the content on a web page and its basic presentation, but JavaScript could dictate behavior. You could do real programming with it. You could use JavaScript to generate additional HTML even. You could put a calculator on a web page. This too is still online. Been up, last modified June 13th, 1997. You could make images change by hovering your mouse over them. Bonus points if you had no idea what they linked to until after you hovered. No, that was a terrible idea. This is not online anymore. This is on an external hard drive where it can't hurt anybody. Why I have that external hard drive, I don't know. I found it along the side of the road. I didn't have anything to do with this. If you were a bank with a ridiculous skeuomorphic website design that looks like an ATM, I can't imagine who would design something so tasteless. But anyway, you could offer not just a calculator, but a mortgage calculator. Yeah, it's not online either. It's on an external hard drive. Safely, I point no, not my computer. I mean, it's somewhere, I hear. But besides calculators and the ever-popular Mouseover images, you could do things like client-side form validation. Validate the data in a form before it's submitted. Now, does that mean you don't need to check it on the server anymore? No, it does not mean that. Never trust user input. They could have bypassed JavaScript. They could have created the HTTP request outside of a browser entirely. Form validation on the client side is for convenience, not security. Still need to do it on the server side. Okay. So that was really useful. Nevertheless, as with any new technology, there were those who would use JavaScript for the forces of evil. Yes, with JavaScript, the pop-up ad was born. Gee, thanks, JavaScript. Yes, everything was terrible. The web was becoming a nightmare. Oh, shucks, I see it. Even besides pop-up ads. Where's my... Oh, are you kidding me? So aside from pop-up ads, an increasingly large number of sites only worked in one browser on one platform. Because in those days, Netscape and Internet Explorer didn't just compete on user interface features. They each added their own non-standard HTML elements and other features. IE had Marquee. Whee! Netscape had Blink. Oh boy. I won't even harm your eyes with that one. Our lives were enriched. Competition had fostered such innovation. No, it was terrible. Both had significant market share and had developed wildly different object models. To interact with the page, in Internet Explorer, you used document.all. In Netscape, document.layers. So if a site did anything so much as add a pull-down menu with JavaScript, it probably had to be written twice. Welcome to the first browser war. And if you were really cool, you put nifty little buttons on your site to let people know what browser to download. Aside from different APIs for JavaScript and their own proprietary HTML elements, each browser had major features that were just plain absent in the other. Internet Explorer, once version 4.0 came out, was bundled with Windows and quickly became the single most widely used browser. But at least Spyglass was getting paid since it was based on Mosaic, right? Haha, right. Since Microsoft bundled it with Windows for free, they didn't have to pay any royalties. Okay, so they did get sued. They settled for a measly $8 million. But anyway, Internet Explorer began to dominate, and it introduced its own features, such as ActiveX. ActiveX allowed native compiled Windows code to be included in web pages. Now, that obviously opened up a lot of possibilities as long as you were willing to ignore every non-Windows user, which a lot of businesses were perfectly willing to do. The web was starting to become just another delivery mechanism for Windows code. And, thanks to the fact that Outlook Express, which was also included in every copy of Windows, used the Internet Explorer engine to display messages, email could run native code. What could possibly go wrong? That's right, lots of crap went wrong, and computer worms did billions of dollars in damage. And sometimes just previewing a message, you didn't even have to open it. Just click the subject line. That was enough to wreck everything. Compiled native code right in an email preview. Good times. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, ActiveX. Right. So why did companies use it? Since it broke the internet and was catastrophically insecure? Well, it did offer some enticing behavior, including one really neat thing that would eventually catch on and be adopted by other browsers, albeit in a pure JavaScript form. It was called XML HTTP request, often shortened to XHR, and it made its debut in Outlook Web Access with Microsoft Exchange Server 2000. It allowed a web page to get additional data from the server after the page loaded without refreshing the entire page. Despite the name, data was not limited to XML. It really had nothing to do with XML. It was just a mechanism for asynchronous requests. You may have heard of it by a different name. In 2005, Jesse James Garrett of Adaptive Path wrote a blog post describing a new pattern of designing web applications using XHR, and he called it, what? Ajax. Anybody heard of Ajax? A couple people? Son of a cussin' booger ranger. Pardon my language. I have no idea where it is. Oh, it's under here locked, I think. Man, it is in a foul mood today. Yes, Ajax. Good times. Asynchronous requests. Refresh part of the page without refreshing the whole page. But every browser implemented it differently still. So we were still writing everything multiple times. And when you did that in those days, this is 2005 or so, using JavaScript in combination with HTML and CSS, which was finally starting to be supported fairly widely, we called it DHTML. And there were libraries that managed to work in all the major browsers at the time. Then, as now, supporting earlier versions of Internet Explorer was the hardest. Microsoft was finally talking about adopting standards, but old versions hung around for a painfully long time. Netscape usage, though, had thankfully dipped below 0.5%. And Firefox, Netscape's successor, as you all anticipated, was designed from scratch to implement standards. And it was becoming very popular very quickly. Still, those DHTML libraries were necessary for a while, and they were pretty ghastly, and they were huge because they had to rewrite all your code into 2 separate versions. So that meant everyone who visited your page had to download this entire library, which was enormous. So it wasn't great. Thankfully, the next year, several new JavaScript libraries came out that handled cross-platform compatibility in a much more pleasant way, even Ajax. Today, new challengers have since arisen in the browser wars, and they all do their best to implement standards, and they all try to keep themselves up to date, which is great. They even have nice built-in tools for developing JavaScript. And HTML5 offers some new APIs that we can use with JavaScript to do some new things, as well as to do some old things much faster and more easily. And JavaScript itself got a major overhaul with ECMAScript 2015, aka ES6, and it has continued to improve since then. And lucky you, we're not really going to mess with ES5 or older in this course. We're just going to use ES6 and later from day one and just spare you the pain. And now we have about 1 million libraries and full-blown frameworks that let us build fancy JavaScript apps. Still, old versions of Internet Explorer remain the hardest for front-end developers to deal with, as there are still a shocking number of computers running Windows XP. IE8, released 7 years ago, was the last version to support XP. And those who never updated past Windows XP Service Pack 1, for whatever reason, are stuck with IE7. IE has earned a bad enough rap at this point that Microsoft dropped the name and now calls their browser, of course, Edge. But all the modern browsers are pretty okay for our purposes. We'll be using Google Chrome for this class because Seth and I are the most familiar with its developer tools, and we really, really want you to use the developer tools because they make your life so much easier. But the projects we build ought to run in any of the latest versions of the big four browsers. So that's cool. No one can say for sure what the future holds, but the future of front-end development looks pretty bright. So get psyched. It's taken a while to get here, but it's a pretty exciting time to be creating things for the web, and JavaScript has never been better. Are you with me? Woo! All right, now we're talking.